In today's video, we will be removing this turbo and this exhaust manifold. On my Cat 3126B in my RV, I've had a couple of things that I've been needing to do for a little bit. Hasn't caused too many issues, but it's time to deal with them. So the turbo and the exhaust manifold, as far as I can tell, are original installs on this. Not that that's necessarily a problem by itself, but the wastegate on the turbo seems to be seized, closed, and I think it always was that way. It just didn't create a problem until later, and I'll get to that in a second. But I've also been wanting to upgrade the turbo because I like upgrading things, so this makes a good opportunity. The exhaust manifold itself, I think, is fine, and you probably can't see in the video, but I do have a couple of cylinders, like right around here, number 3, where it's leaking just a little bit, and so that needs to get taken care of. You can see the gasket is maybe not in the best shape, definitely looks to be original, and so it's time to just take all of this apart and try to get it back together. My goal with this for the turbo replacement is to put in a turbo that is a more modern design. Will give me some more compressor efficiency, and I'll do another video or two about that in greater detail. The exhaust manifold itself I've kind of gone back and forth on, but I think I'm going to try to just keep that one the way it is. I don't think that there's likely too much of a benefit of me changing it out, but I could change my mind there, especially if I take it apart and find that there's a problem. So a couple of things that I did yesterday before I got started, and these are always a good idea to do. So I sprayed down everything with penetrating oil. Use your favorite. I was going to use some Croil, but I did not have any in stock, so I just went with a normal PB blaster. Whenever you're dealing with old exhaust that's been on something for a long time, it's probably going to be seized. I fully expect the V-band clamp here and then this clamp over here coming off of the compressor to break. That I don't really care about. Those are cheap, those are easy, not a big deal. Where I really get concerned is any of these bolts that are in the head. If those snap and the bolt remains in the head, then that is really bad. Becomes a huge pain to try to deal with. And then you got the bolts that hold the turbo to the manifold, obviously, and it would be better if those do not break, but there's worse things if they do, because that's something you can deal with more easily. So pulling a turbo, really fairly straightforward other than the exhaust rust. You got a total of 6 connections you got to undo. Up here is the oil supply. On the bottom is the oil drain that's a return. And then you've got the turbine inlet where the turbo mounts to the exhaust manifold. You got the outlet where it comes out, goes to the exhaust. And then on the compressor side, you've got the air inlet, and then you've got the air outlet that goes to the engine. I have actually replaced, I had already replaced the oil supply tube previously because that was really rusted, and so I replaced it when I de-seal the oil pump housing, or the oil filter housing, I mean. And this actually kind of looks worse than it is. It's I expected these bolts to break. They did not. They came out really easily, so I hope that that means that everything else will work, keeping my fingers crossed. And then the other side of this tube, probably can't see it from this angle, but it's just a nut that goes on top of the oil housing, oil filter housing. So my general strategy is that I'm going to take off everything else first, and then I'm going to try to unbolt the turbo from the manifold last. Once the turbo's out, then I'm going to start working on the exhaust manifold. Some things that I did yesterday to kind of help get started. First thing, you can tell I've got exhaust wrap here, and I had a turbo wrap that I'd put around the exhaust housing of the turbo. I took that turbo wrap off, and then I sprayed everything, all of the bolts down with penetrating oil, let it soak overnight. Hopefully that will make everything come apart easier. Just a quick note on turbo wrap and exhaust wrap. There's a lot of opinions on whether it's good or bad, and I think they pretty much all have merit, but it really comes down to what you're trying to accomplish. So for me, I was trying to keep the heat out of the engine bay, and I was trying to prevent preheating air before it went through the radiator, since this is a rear radiator bus. And so that was why I decided to do this, and it did seem to actually make an improvement. It also quieted things down a little bit because it's absorbing some of the sound that's coming out through the exhaust. So, all right, enough talking. Let's get to work. All right, so a bit of a progress update. Really, so far, at the risk of jinxing myself, everything has been going pretty okay. Now that I've said that, it'll get worse. But if you take a look, you can see I got the V-band clamp off of the turbo. That did break as I had expected it to, so that's no big deal. Obviously, I got the exhaust wrap off where it was covering things. Took out my EGT probe. I actually have gotten all of the nuts off of the turbo to the manifold. The reason that you see that one there is I put it in to hold it in because I have not gotten the turbo drain out. Turbo supply is off. Had to do that to get at the 2 bolts on the front side of the engine, but you can see that paper towel I've got down there, I've got that covering the oil supply outlet coming from the oil housing, oil filter housing, because I want to make sure that there's no junk that gets in there. Last thing I want is dirty oil contaminating my brand new turbo when that gets on. If you look, you can also see I've started to get some of the bolts out of the manifold. Some of them you really can't get at until the turbo gets out, but they've come out pretty well so far. I think that's a combination of good hardware, good materials that Caterpillar uses. So thumbs up to the Caterpillar engineers. But definitely soaking them in PB Blaster doesn't hurt either. One of them was actually completely loose, not tight at all. This top one on the number 5 cylinder. You'll notice that Cat from the factory has these metal crossover bars that you can bang them as to have lock tabs. Interesting, I don't usually see that on exhaust systems, but apparently that was a good thing in this case. I'll have to do some research to see if that is superseded in any future designs. So now I think I'm going to go underneath the bus to try to take the turbo drain off. Hopefully that comes off easily, and then I will pull the turbo. I guess maybe last couple of notes. So the turbo outlet clamp, that one actually didn't break all the way, but it did bend, so I'm going to replace that, which I expected. And then the clamp for the turbo inlet, that wasn't an issue, but you can see, don't know if you can see, this elbow gets very close to the alternator. I'm hoping that I won't have to remove the alternator to do this. I don't think I should, but we'll see. Worse things if needed, but I think I should be able to snake the turbo out just fine once I get everything apart. Yeah, so far so good. So we'll just keep working. Alright, so you can see here the turbo drain. That's this tube that comes off of the turbo and goes into the side of the block. Sorry, the lighting's not very good under here. It's just held onto the block with 2 bolts, one on either side. Those are easy to get at. It looks as though there is really no way for me to get to the turbo side of it, which hopefully won't be a problem. I think there's enough space, but basically I'm just gonna undo those 2 bolts, and once everything looks to be good, I will then, I might try getting it out from this side, but I'm probably going to go up top again and try to get at it from there. Alright, I've now created the first naturally aspirated 3126, at least that I know of. Not going to run it this way, obviously, but turbo got out. Really wasn't bad. Main thing is that I had to do, and that made it harder, and you won't have to do this yourself, most likely, is I had to remove the oil, one of the oil lines on my oil filter or oil cooler sandwich plate adapter. That's a custom thing that I made up, and it was getting in the way of the wastegate actuator. I'll do a little walkthrough on the turbo later, but it was completely seized, so, or the wastegate was completely seized, so my suspicions were correct, and it definitely needed to get replaced. So now on to the manifold, and let's see if we can get this thing out. Well, I got the manifold out, and honestly, none of this went too badly, so happy for that. I'll go outside in a minute and kind of show you things. But I suppose the only tip is on the number 1 cylinder. Let's see if I can get a better view here. Not entirely. But basically the thermostat housing is right above and around the number 1 cylinder exhaust, and that made it hard to get to. So I ended up having to modify a wrench. You can see I ground down some of that to get towards the top bolt. I can say with certainty that this was original because there's no way that you could have gotten at the angle to hammer down the lock tabs on the number 1 cylinder. So it's all out. Let's take a look at what we got. And that's what's left of the exhaust manifold gaskets. So nothing that was blown out, but definitely falling apart. So no surprise that this was leaking. Well, here's the exhaust manifold and the turbo now removed from my RV. Really, the manifold is in pretty good condition. The ports look just fine, ignoring the dust from my floor. But I'm not seeing anything that really looks or feels to be problematic on them. Need to get cleaned up, of course, before putting it all back together. These were just leaking. I guess you can actually see here, it looks like this was leaking a little bit because this was the bolt that was finger tight, and you can see a little bit of erosion here. So, but I don't know, maybe not. But it overall doesn't look too bad. This definitely looks reusable. I'm not sure if I am going to reuse it, just because I want to take a look at a couple of the other manifolds out there and see if I think any of them might give me a little bit better flow. Turbo, on the other hand, this thing is not entirely shot. It was actually still working, but it is old, original, and not in the best of shape. Forget about the outside part, but you can see turbo blades, they're a little dirty. That's not necessarily a big deal, although this is dirtier than I would like to see them. Kind of surprised actually that they're maybe this dirty. But you know, maybe the air filter over time wasn't good. There's really not all that much play in it, and not enough that it's touching the housing, but there is some play. Compressor, again, not terrible, but not great. But I did take a pair of pliers and try to move the wastegate, and that is entirely seized, will not move at all. So that's stuck in the closed position, and my guess is that it's been that way as long as I've had this RV, which is not good for the turbo. So high quality turbo like this is generally not going to blow itself up. And the other thing is that because this engine has an overboost cutoff, fuel cutoff, that partially limits how much boost it can make, although that surge or immediate fuel cut and rapid change in RPM is not good for the turbo either. But original OEM cat part, pretty good. So I guess one thing, taking a look at this, you can see here, the two bolts that hold the turbo drain on, these are actually pretty accessible. I suppose if I cared enough, I probably could have gotten these out from inside, or with the RV still, with the turbo still in the RV. But this did not make it any more difficult to get it out. You can see that there's an O-ring that seals on the bottom here, and that was still in just fine shape. So I think I'm going to end this video here because I'm not yet sure what I'm going to do on putting it back together. I know I'm going to change the turbo out, and I've got a few ideas there. I may change the manifold. Even have thought about doing a compound turbo setup, although I probably will not do that. Really, tips on this, take your time. You're probably going to need to modify a couple of wrenches or a wrench depending on your setup to get at some of the bolts. I don't know whether the bolts would have come out quite so easily if I hadn't soaked them in penetrating oil, but it definitely didn't hurt anything. And they definitely came out easier than I would have expected. So I'll say CAD Engineering probably gets the kudos for that, but preparation is always a good thing. So really, honestly, not too bad of a job. If I'd known that it would go this easily, I might have done it before. And now to figure out what to order and put it all back together. Thanks for watching.